representing Franchise Secrets, Erik Von Horn.
Hey, in this episode of Franchise Secrets, I have my good friend, Ryan Casey, who's an Orangetheory franchisee. He's like in the top, one of his locations in the top 20. One of them is number 4 in the country. But what I appreciate about Ryan, he's gone from a 1099 guy into Orangetheory. One, he did it like pretty active. Second one, very semi-absentee with the goal to be fully passive. And so we wanted to get into things of like passive investing, what he's doing on passive investing. The number one thing that we see as return on investment in the Tribe of Investor Mastermind. The second thing that's the best ROI, and the third best thing. And like, spoiler alert, it's not deal flow. Everyone came in thinking it was deal flow, and we'll get into a deal. We'll break down a deal for you. But there are other return on investments that the members said that were highest for them. And so we got into some of that. And I think you'll start to understand private deal flow versus like the public markets. And if you are serious about going from a job, a W-2 job, to self-employed 1099 to a business owner, which is where most of you are as a business owner, and then moving into that investor quadrant and the cash flow quadrant that Robert Kiyosaki has, this is going to be a really interesting, fun episode for you with a really good friend of mine, Ryan Casey. So if you're interested in the mastermind, check out tribeofinvestors.com. Get into my world, get into Justin Donald's world, justindonald.com, and start to learn some of this stuff. You can do so much in terms of research and learning without joining in the mastermind. We break it down for you, so I hope you enjoy. Ryan, welcome back again. I don't know how many times you've been on. You should have been on like 100 times, but I think you've only been on once or twice. So welcome back.
Thank you. I've been on a couple. What's actually funny is I just did a little training for one of our new people in Orangetheory, and she Googled me and she listened to the podcast before, so she already knew a bunch of the stuff I was gonna talk to her about. But thanks for having me on the podcast again. It's been helpful,
dude. That's awesome. We're going to be talking about like going from the job to a franchisee to a semi-absentee franchisee to passive, to how you're doing things now and new brands that you're part of, and how you look at passive income. Because the goal for all of us that are in franchising, or most people, I should say, is if you follow that cash flow quadrant, you want to go from employee to investor. Like that's the route that most of us got into. And I'm referencing Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant. And I know that you've been intentional with that. And so I just kind of want to, let's just follow your journey from job to Z to passive Z or semi-absentee Z to like that passive income goal. So where do you want to start?
Well, I skipped out on the employee side. You know, at 17, I went straight to the 1099, the self-employed one. You know, I was one of the Cutco crew.
True.
But I guess and
by the way, that's where most people think they are business owners. Like it's easy to fall into the trap of if you're 1099 self-employed, you are a business owner. It's just another kind of name for a job. It's the next step, but it's still the job.
You might have more control of your flexibility, but from somebody that's been in both places, I was one of those people where I'm like, oh, I'm a business owner. And then when I was actually a business owner, looking back, I'm like, oh, I wasn't a business owner. Like there was definitely some comparisons and aspects of it, but it is definitely not the same thing.
I noticed you have your lifestyle investor jacket on. I've got my tribe of investor jacket on. So we're both part of Justin Donald's world, and he's got multiple masterminds. I am business partners in one of his masterminds, and we're just going to be talking a little bit more about investing on some of these podcasts that we do. And so I thought no better way to kick it off than Ryan, because he's involved with both. So, all right, going back, you had a 1099 business/job.
Yeah. And that's, well, you mentioned the investing, and that's what really got me into franchising. And so I had been Cutco guy forever, you know, self-employed. I can manage most of my own schedule, but still have the meetings and things I need to show up for. But I was saving a decent amount of money, but, you know, I was doing the typical stock market things, and had a Smith Barney guy, and looking at my amounts over 7-10 years, it's not changing as much as I'd like it besides what I'm putting into it. And got really frustrated, saying, I'd like to invest in something where my skill sets could have more control on the outcome of the investment. And that's what, Orangetheory opportunity just was kind of random. I was a member and saw them open up their second one in Washington. And that's when I'd been having that investment thought. And when that opportunity came up, it was like, oh, this could be the one.
So how big were they when you first?
We got in, there was 150 locations.
Did it seem big or small to you at that point?
I didn't really have anything to reference it to. It was, it wasn't as big as something that I would, a 24-hour fitness or well-known gyms, those types of things. But then when I started checking out the scope, like 150 seemed like a lot to me, or at least enough to like, okay, this is something that works. Because they only had one in the state of Washington at that point. And I was a member there, and when I saw them open up their second one, it was basically the same thing we do with Cutco. We train a manager, we work through them not being in that office. So I thought, it'd be like having another office in my division at the time.
Looking back, how much had they improved from 150 units to where they are today?
Wow. A lot. I mean, before, when I first got in, they weren't even really teaching Facebook advertising for leads. And now that's where a lot of it's dependent on. When we first came in, their sales process was like, well, here's a notebook. You write people down in it, and then that way you know who's showing up for the day, which was great because that's where my skill set came in. And that's one of the things that helped us get towards the top fairly quick, was some of the areas they hadn't developed as well were the areas that I felt pretty confident in.
Well, I think that's just an important little tangent because we're in this era of emerging brands. And when I first got into franchising too, Ryan, I think there was 100 plus locations open of the brand that I first got started with. And it felt really big to me at the time, but looking back, it really wasn't. And so people out there looking at brands, it's interesting finding a brand with 100 plus units open. You can just do a lot more due diligence on that brand. And yet they still have a lot of room to grow. So don't get caught up in the, you got to buy now. I was talking to somebody the other day. They're like, I've got to buy this now. I'm like, how many units do they have open? 2 units, and they're about to sell out the state of Utah. I'm like, no, they're not. And if they are, that's okay. So, yeah. So anyway, OTF, you got into that. You still had your 1099 full-time gig. You got into that. You opened up store number 1. What kind of owner were you at that point? What kind of time were you putting into the business?
Well, so the first one, I'm not a gym person. I wasn't a franchise person. And so I didn't know anything. And I understood I didn't know anything. So I wanted to be there as much as I could. So throughout the pre-sales process was pretty active. Like I was the first guy putting on the orange suit, passing out flyers. And then, as the pre-sales went on, I became less involved with that. But then when we opened up, then, I was in there from 4:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night for the first month, making sure that I'm learning the business and doing it, and everything's going the right way. And then gradually I wouldn't be in as much. I never wanted to be the studio manager. That was never a problem. I knew from the beginning we're hiring somebody to operate it. But, the hiring and stuff, that was my skill set. So I still held on to that. So I did the hiring for probably the first year, even for front desk or coaches. Like I would go do the interviews and I would do that stuff for probably almost the first year of being in business with that first location.
So so then you got a second location opened up. What changed, if anything, going from one location to 2 locations? Because the ultimate goal, I'm excited to get to the end of this interview because you are doing the passive investing thing. The way that you've structured your new brand is very unique, and it's more of a passive type ownership in franchises. So you're not only doing franchising much more passive, and it's not the brand, it's you and how you've structured it. And then you're doing a lot of passive investments, which we will get into some of those in detail so the audience can start to understand what we talk about when we say passive cash flow and investments. But the road to get there, location 1 to location 2, what did you intentionally do differently?
I wanted to not be as dependent, because then what happened on my first one is I started stepping out more and more, and the staff noticed, and they're like, well, where are you going? I'm like, well, what? Well, I thought you were going to be here. Like, oh, I have to do the interviews now. And I didn't want that feeling, them going through that. So going into the second one, I wanted to set that setting from the beginning. Now, if I was doing less, that also meant we had to have somebody in there who was capable of doing more. And we reevaluated our pay structure and we added more pay to our studio manager because the type of applicant that we wanted to have somebody that's going to come in there with an ownership mentality and want to build the business with us. But you can't pay bottom of the barrel and get a person like that. So we wanted to, be not competitive. We wanted to be ahead above of people in similar roles because we were going to expect more out of them. And so in that second location, I was extremely hands-off with the pre-sales. I've never hired anybody for that second location. Besides, actually, studio manager, 2 studio managers after our first studio manager, after 4 years. So in our first 4 years, I didn't hire anybody.
So this is good. The key to semi-absentee ownership in all the brands that I know about is you have to pay for that manager, that director of operations, that district regional manager, whatever it is, you have to pay for them, whether it's paying for them in just cash, like more payroll, or some type of equity, but you need to pay for that. And that's kind of, a lot of people just think, oh, the brand's semi-absentee. Because somebody's semi-absentee, the brand says they're semi-absentee, that automatically makes them semi-absentee. No, it is you paying more for good people so you can pull away.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything where you can say a brand is 100% semi-absentee. Because even a brand like that, if you're not hitting a certain threshold, it's not going to be. So there's multiple factors, right? The brand might have the structure to be able to potentially be semi-absentee, but then there's a results threshold that you have to get to be able to afford that person. And then you have to have the willingness to know, okay, I'm going to be willing to pay a little bit more to have that. And there needs to be enough meat on the bone where you can still survive running your business and make that operator happy. But all 3 of those things have to happen. You can't just say, oh, brand's an absentee, it's total passive franchise brand. Like, it may have potential to be mostly passive, but there's a lot of other factors in there.
All right. So give us a sense of, you kind of did, you've only made 2 other hires since you opened that one up. Like, what's the day in the life or a week in the life of Ryan Casey and his Orange Theories?
I would go more to the month.
I like that even better.
So each month I go to each studio twice. And so every other week, go to the studio. I generally sit down with the studio manager or management staff for an hour. And our meeting is basically, I'll look over sales numbers and ask okay, how's it going? I already know, they already know, but it's more of like, where's the direction of things? And really it's, hey, what can we do for you? My parents are my business partners. So they usually will come up on those days as well. They live about an hour and a half away from me. So I'll meet them at the first studio. We meet with the studio manager and management team. We work out for an hour and then we sit in the staff meeting and then I go pick up my daughter. And then the next day, my parents usually crash at my place that night, which is nice. I can do date night. Parents can watch the kids. And then the next day we do the same thing for the other studio. And so twice a month, back-to-back days, we spend 3 to 4 hours at the studio. And then, then there's one-off times, something's broken or something, usually if they need support, I try to be in a supportive role. But that's it. That's a normal month for us.
So you and I have kind of different skill sets, and we've gotten to know each other really well over the past few years. And I want to dive into that a little bit. My skill, I'm not very operational, and I'm just started a new partnership as a franchisee, a new partnership. And we had a call with the leadership team of the franchisor, like the brand president. And I showed up to that meeting, embarrassing my business partners. We took a screenshot of it, but I was in the hot tub. And it was perfect. Looking back, it was perfect because they're like, we really want to understand what the 4 business partners are doing. And 2 of us are passive, like fully passive. And I think they wanted to understand from us, like they wanted to hear me say, I'm not doing anything in this business. Do I even need an email for the brand? That's what they wanted to hear from me to make sure that we were on the same page. And so I didn't even run the meeting. I get on there and I'm like, they said, yeah, we want to know how active and what you guys are doing in the business. I'm like, well, we'll let my other 2 business partners lead the way. And I just agreed with everything that they said. And I put up with a bunch of crap as they were saying, I can't believe you're in a hot tub, Erik. And they were like, this is hilarious. So I had them then laughing. But it's easy for me to not be operational. I'm not very organized. I've got a lot of strengths, but those aren't my strengths. So give the audience a little bit of like what your strengths and weaknesses are, because that way people can identify. Either they're like, oh, I'm like Ryan like this, or I'm not. But I think that's helpful because you got some amazing skill sets.
Yeah, well, I'm not the super charismatic, you can throw me in a room and I'm going to make friends with everybody really quickly. And so I taught sales forever. So people are like, wait, that's what it, like, no, that is all out of my comfort zone. I can do it. I don't enjoy it. I'm an introvert at heart. And so I like the systems. I like being able to have time to observe and make a decision and analyze what works best and put things together. And I like doing puzzles, putting the puzzle pieces together. Who are the best people to connect there? What's the best talent? What are they good at? And where should they be? So that's what I enjoy doing, is that type of stuff, building the systems and processes to where I can build something and it can run. And then I can say, I'm finished with it. I did that. That system is working now.
Is it unique knowing that you can pull back because you're more operational, but you can pull back from the operations? Have you found that? Is that a challenge for you, or is it not really?
I think it's been a long path. I opened my first Cutco office in 2001. And, when I was a full year manager, 24, 25, my first 3.5 years of being a Cutco full-time manager, I worked 6.5 days a week. Like other managers started to delegate, like, oh, I had my person running training. Like, it took me that long to let them run training. The only time I'd let them do it was when we were on the company trip. That was like my baby. And it took a long time for me to give that up. And then once I started doing it, I think what really was the kind of the light bulb for me is I saw that when you give more, you develop people faster. And that's what I was really in it for. That's what I really loved, was seeing the development of people. And you can't develop them when you handcuff them and you only let them do so much. So when I saw that, then I'm like, oh, okay, now I feel comfortable giving up all the responsibilities in the right way, with the right process, the right delegation in place when things are ready. And that's when I was able to kind of step away and get away from the micromanaging and having to have my hands on everything as it went.
When did you realize you wanted to go fully passive, or just dive to get to that investor quadrant faster? And it probably has something to do with Justin Donald, because you've known Justin longer than I have.
Yeah, Justin was a huge spark for it. So initially, I got an Orangetheory as an investment. I wasn't planning on leaving my job. And then one of my good buddies, Justin, he's like, and he was ahead of me in the Cutco totem pole. He was crushing it. And he's like, yeah, I'm done. I was like, what? You're just walking away? He's like, yeah, I'm doing this mobile home park thing. It's awesome. I'll see you later. Like, you're just leaving? Like, we don't have pensions and things like that as a 1099. Like, you walk. Like, you might get a little bonus or like, thanks for helping, over 20 years, but
there's no equity.
Yeah,
zero equity.
You're not selling your business. And that
you're self-employed, zero equity.
Going back to our initial, that's big reason number one between self-employed and business owner. When you walk away, you buy, here's the keys again, versus you sell it and you bring the equity. But so that was like, wow, he just walked away. That's really interesting. And I had it down where Cutco was pretty easy for me at that point. But then the Orangetheory started picking up. And I was like, I got to the point where both of my Orangetheories were each one was matching my Cutco income. And then I had kids. And I'm like, 80% of my effort is now spent on 20 to 30% of my income. And I'm totally fine without that section of income. I'd be more than fine. So what am I doing? And that's where I said, well, let me give it one more year, because my dad's Mr. Conservative. We didn't leverage our Orangetheories heavy. We paid for our second one basically with our first one. And so we didn't take a withdrawal, one distribution, until both Orangetheories were debt-free, because I was working too. So I didn't need the cash flow. So in October of 2018, we took our first distribution. I said, well, let me go 2019 with working and both of them, make sure studios are good and everything. And then I'll make the decision there. And I'm like, yeah, we're good. So January 2020, I'm like, I'm done. Right. It's retrospect. The timing turned out to be
horrible timing.
And it was the best thing. I mean, we could go a whole tangent on that. I don't want to get too far off, but throughout 2 months later, COVID happens. I'm in Washington State. My Orangetheories are shut down for a year. But that's also when I had my call with you in March of 2020. And then that's when Justin texts me and he's like, hey, do you want to do an investor happy hour thing? We just meet on Fridays and talk about investing. And I wouldn't have been able to have the time for some of those things that I got into if I was doing that. So I kept telling myself in 2020, this will be my worst financial year ever. I've never lost money in a year working, right? But I want to be able to look back 5-10 years later and say, if it wasn't for COVID, I wouldn't be here. And it turns out I didn't have to wait 5 or 10 years. We're talking 2 or 3 years later. I'm in a way better spot that if I had still been working, these other opportunities wouldn't have been able to happen.
Dude, I love that. As you were starting to tell that story, because I know the story, I was part of that story. And I'm like, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing today if COVID hadn't happened. We like sucked for so many reasons, but like our friendship with Justin and so many of the people that we know now and like the opportunities that you and I have, never be able to have that if it wasn't for COVID making us slow down.
And I think you can substitute COVID with any challenge and it's just the way that we're built, right? We know that the challenges happen. You can either, be miserable about it, or you can work your best to find the silver lining. And, I didn't have a job. My studios weren't open. I had no reason to be doing anything, but I was down on my computer learning different stuff. I'd say, hey, I'll come out at 1 o'clock in the afternoon to play with the kids. And then when everybody went to bed, I'd be doing stuff, doing all these things to learn different skill sets, to say I need to connect with these different people and do things so I can come out of this ahead.
So here's the deal with the Franchise Tribe Mastermind. It's full of a bunch of successful franchisees across many different industries, many different brands, and you get to be a part of that. Now, if you've had any level of success in franchising, you've probably been around top performing Z's in your current brand. So think about that. And if you could do that with 40 plus different brands, industries, franchisees, that's the value in the mastermind. I bring in some of the best speakers in the world. We talk about some topics that will never be talked about anywhere else. So if you're interested in being a part of a group like that, check out franchisetribe.com. All right, so let's dive into passive investing now, because you are ahead of probably a lot of franchisees out there, because of the friendships that you have and the connections that you have and the action that you've taken. So either you pick, kind of give us the reasons why you wanted to or started passive investing, cash flow investing, or give us a deal, or both.
Well, Justin's just been a good model for me. I mean, I've known the guy for 20 years, so I've seen him from, crazy young Cutco manager causing trouble to, now where he is today. So I had a good model, and I just loved what he was doing. And, and then I was very fortunate that he involved me really early. There was only 5 or 6 of us on those first calls. It's like, well, this is great. And it was an education for me. On some of the alternate investing and those I'd just been kind of diving into that type of stuff. I joined an angel group and have been diving into commercial real estate a little bit, but doing stuff on my own versus being around these people that were already there. So that was really helpful. And then I got into my first few investments there, which were great. We're just like, wow, it's nice to see actual returns on your investments on a monthly basis, just watching the ticker go up and down. And especially the more you get in that stock portfolio, in a bad day, you're like, oh, that stinks. And you just can't watch it, right? You shouldn't do that with, your long-term investments, but it was great having monthly income. And that's where, when Justin started talking about that, I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's the next goal then, right? Right now I'm fairly passive. I only go in a couple times a month, but now I want to completely replace all of that with totally passive, right? And that way, because then it doesn't take any more of my time. My time is my most valuable thing at this point. I will not sacrifice the time for kids with adding new opportunities. So I have to be careful about how I have those opportunities and structure them the right way.
So give us an example of just a deal, because I talk about deals a lot. We all talk about deals a lot. We talk about passive cash flow. And I think a lot of people know apartment syndication, which is, we're going into a winter with apartment syndications, or just, it's not what it was. There's some really unique ones out there and some opportunities, but that's all changing because of the bridge loans and the interest rates and all that. So we're not talking about apartment syndications. We're talking about other things. So do you have an example of a deal?
I think Chicago Atlantic was one of the first ones I got into that I really enjoyed. And so
was this like 2020?
This is January 2020. So a lot of, if you're in Justin's world, you know Chicago Atlantic because they've had multiple deals. They've done really well, but this was their first fund early. And of course, it was from the introduction from Justin. And what was also unique about it is I funded it with 80% of the investment I put in was funded from my cash value of my life insurance, which at the time I was getting at 3% money for a 12% return.
So you were borrowing 3% on your cash value life insurance.
Yeah.
And then you put that money into a deal, Chicago Atlantic.
Yeah, that was paying out 12% quarterly.
So paying out 12% APR on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, just get 9% return on majority of it. And then eventually I paid that down, especially as rates have gone up. Now didn't use that, but I would.
Yeah, because that changes. It's an important distinction. When rates were low, it was nice to do that, but that delta is different now that rates have gone up.
Yeah. And side tangent, but when you're doing that, I wish I would have looked back. Like Justin's like, yeah, you didn't lock it in at 3.5. I'm like, no, I didn't even think I wasn't using it much at that point. I paid down. But always looking for different lenders, and I'm switching now to, instead of 6.5, I can get it locked in for 5%, right?
That's so important though, because a lot of people miss out on the little details. Like you can, Justin wasn't like your coach back then. Things were just like, he was just helping here and there. And so it wasn't like a mastermind. It wasn't super detailed. It was just, these happy hours. But the details matter.
Oh yeah. If we had the mastermind 2 years earlier, wow. If we had the mastermind 2 years earlier, that would have been game changer.
Yeah, because it's these details. People think they're doing all the right things, but as simple as, did you lock in your 3% rate?
Yeah. And here's one of the big things is you hire a professional. Most people are doing that where they're doing a lot of one-time stuff. And you got to have the relationship. It's a long-term thing because things change and you have to keep adjusting stuff. So the iBlock, yeah, that was great. I have an insurance-backed line of credit, got a great rate. But then as things went, hey, you want to make sure that you can actually lock it in 2 years. You might pay a little bit more than what you're paying today. But, if you're not around the right people with the conversations there, that's not something you just like, oh, I already have that set up, I'll just leave it. You got to be a little more in tune with everything.
You got into the Chicago Atlantic deal, 12% APR, paid out quarterly. Are you still in it,
Yeah.
3 years, 2.5 years later, whatever?
Yeah. Got my payout at 12% now. That one went public, so I have that. I have a lot of it still left in the their REIT, so it's public, which is nice because I have the liquidity and still paying the same 12%. So the price goes up or down, doesn't really matter because I'm getting the cash flow from it, which is great. And I do have immediate with liquidity versus with the private deal. At a different valuation on there, but with public, I can get rid of it whenever I want to or not.
So can people go get that public REIT now?
Yeah. And I'm not an investment advisor. This is not, investment advice.
None of this is investment advice. I should have said that at the very beginning. Now I know what to say in my intro.
Yeah. This is the ticker is REFI, REFI. But yeah, we're getting 12% return on it. So it's great.
Good.
And I've had the conversations enough where it's not like I'm just looking for what's the highest return on a REIT and not knowing any of the inner workings of the company. I've seen them on Justin's calls almost at least half a dozen times now. We know a lot about the company.
Yeah, that's important. Give us a sense of that deal compared to just other deals that come across your desk, you look at, or you're involved with. Is that like the highest end deal at 12%, or are there other deals that are paying more or less? Because I think of one for myself. I'll just say it real quick, as you say. I think the least highly liquid, very highly liquid. No real upside, but it's paying 10% APR and has consistently for a long time. Highly liquid. That's probably the lowest APR, but lowest risk that I'm involved with.
When it was in its private fund, it had some equity kickers. And so there was a couple bonuses. We got a nice payout. And what's cool is they performed better than they expected their first year, even being public. So even though their dividend was 12%, there was an additional payment while it was a public stock in January. So we got an extra, probably 2% for the year on there. So it paid 14% as a public stock, which is great. It just shows the quality of the team. But some of the other ones I've looked
Did you
at.
have some equity kickers as well before it went public?
Yeah, and that just raised your value. So I got a little, we can get into the weeds here, but when they switched to public, there was some equity they couldn't switch over to the REIT because of the way it's structured. So they just paid that out directly. So I got a little bit of capital back from that, of things that couldn't go to the REIT. But some of the other returns you see, real estate, you see a lot lower cash flow ones initially, but then you have more upside. So it's, picking the right project, returns. Let's get another side tangent, because that's what we tend to do.
I like these side tangents.
We're designing the deal tracker for Justin's group, and we're having these different filters of how do I filter through these deals. And one of the decisions we decided to make was to not filter based off of immediate return or cash flow or expected IRR, because what happens is it shouldn't really be the leading decision. The first thing on your filter shouldn't just be, hey, is it hitting this 12% or whatever?
So cash flow, IRR, shouldn't be the first thing that you look at in a deal, or as you are evaluating deals?
No, people get burned that way of thinking like this, how can I go to the highest amount? It's what's fitting into your asset allocation. What are hitting all the other criteria? And then, of course it needs to be a certain threshold, but people see the higher amounts and they start forgetting all the other things they had in their criteria, which is why it's important to have a criteria before you start looking at deals, as opposed to just coming up with it each time and making that decision from scratch.
Justin and I should do a podcast on deal criteria, investor criteria, because we've spent significant amounts of time on that with our mastermind members, both lifestyle investor and tribe of investors, because that's so important. Just like franchisees should have criteria for brands that they're getting into. Just like a one-pager, like what are the deal breakers for you? What are the things that are most important? You should have that as you invest in brands as a franchisee or even as franchisors. We look at things at Front Street Equity Partners. We have criteria that we look for in brands, and some of them just don't make it. But investing in passive income deals, cash flow deals, private market deals, you should have a criteria as well.
Yeah. One of your documents has been super helpful is the 100 questions to ask a franchisor when you're vetting a franchise. And you should have something similar for your investing, especially when you start playing with bigger chunks. When people are in dollar cost averaging, throwing a couple grand in the investments every month, that's one thing. But when you're putting equivalent to how much it is to start up a franchise into investing, why wouldn't you do the same due diligence? Why wouldn't you ask the same questions when you're getting to those types of deals?
Let's go on another side tangent real quick. A lot of people, when they are thinking about learning about passive investing, getting into passive investing, it's all about deal flow. And Justin and I have crazy amounts of deal flow. And that's what people think that they want is deal flow. But what we've discovered, meaning Justin and myself and you've discovered, is there are things that are equal or maybe more important than deal flow, especially when you look at immediate ROI. So talk about that, like what you've seen as you've been in the world and you've seen a lot of different people get into our masterminds, and what they thought was the most important thing may not be the most important thing a year or 2 years later.
Yeah. So, to take a step back, I had always been kind of involved in the mastermind from the beginning and helping. And then this last summer, I decided that I would take an actual role with it. So as CEO,
that's not true. You were Justin set you up to take more of an active role. He did it a very passive aggressive way. Both him and I were like, Ryan, really? How can we get Ryan to take a more active role in? And not me, like Justin was, but I was having conversations with him, and like he was grooming you, like you were doomed to take that position.
He wanted me to, and then he put somebody in there who wasn't from inside the mastermind circle. And there just was a lot of, they didn't understand how the things work. They were great operations and stuff, but we were a very different animal. And I was like, just let me do it, Justin. So, so back to your original question. So I start diving in, and I'm working with different members. I'm onboarding members. I'm talking with everybody. I'm very involved with all of the members. And when Justin first started, it was all about deal flow. That was the attractive thing. And it was new. Alternative investing was something that isn't really common for most people. They really wanted to learn. And that's what the beginning of the mastermind was. And then the mastermind started growing, and it grew into this amazing community. And there's more speakers coming in, and there's tax strategists coming in, and there's all these other educational speakers coming in. after the mastermind's been there for a year and a half or so, we started looking at, okay, who's benefited the most from the mastermind and how? And when we broke that down, the number one return from the mastermind was not the deal flow, it was the connections. And that's a very broad, you're like, oh, connections, that's what masterminds are for, connections. But these are connections that tie to a specific outcome. So connections like structuring my company right when I exited and being able to pull out $1 million more than what I would have if I didn't structure it that way. That's a $1 million return in a year because of the couple people that you talk to. And like we had, I think 10 people exit their company in a 2-month period last fall. And most of them are 8 figures. I mean, it was, the community is amazing, right? But that's the type of thing. You know, there's been people who've created their own businesses by partnering up, matching their skill sets together. So that was the number one thing with, you know, if you want to get better at passive investing, the most important thing is look for the right connections, because the best deals, most of Justin's deal flow comes from his connections. And as good of an investor as Justin is, his best skill set is connecting with people, right? Is creating amazing relationships. He loves giving, and that's why it's, you know, he attracts a really high quality person. But the connections is the number one ROI. The second thing I would say with passive investing is education. You know, because a deal is a one-time deal. You're going to do that deal. Maybe you keep putting more money in the fund, but you think about where you are in your life right now and how much longer are you going to be making financial decisions. And the education from the mastermind, we saw that this was things like locking in your line of credit. You know, that's being in those types of conversations. That's a huge game changer, right? Being able to lock it in at 3.5 versus now with floating rate 6.5. That paid for it right there, right? That would have been an easy one. And then the third one we really noticed that a lot of people were talking about was the tax strategy. That's where people were getting the biggest return. And when you're passive investing, this is another reason why you don't just look at what's the highest rate, because what's the highest return on paper might be taxed at ordinary income. And then you look at another return that might be 1% or 2 low, but it has different tax advantages, where when you look at the net of those two and the other one's the one that's going to be the better return for you. And so now that's just not, you shouldn't make your decision solely based on tax advantage, but that should be filtered into the equation. And when you get good at tax strategy, it's a much faster return on investment than any deal. It's very rare that you see 1-year deals or 8-month deals. We're investing today, in 8 months it pays off and you're done, right? But with tax strategy, you can realize the benefit within that 12-month period because you're filing your taxes each year. So, and then finally it was the deals. And now when I say this, I'm not putting down deals at all, saying the deals weren't as good as what we were thinking. The deals are just as good as when the people were coming in. That, like, the deal flow is just as valuable as far as being able to meet these different sponsors and have this stuff. It's just we didn't realize how much better those first 3 things really are on the return. And you don't need a mastermind to do this, right? Justin's silver plattered it for people who want to be able to get in. And same thing with you and Justin. It's like, this is on a silver platter, but anybody can work on connections, right? Who are you connecting with, and being really intentional about who do I want in my world that talks about this type of stuff, that has this knowledge, which leads to the education. What kind of questions I'm asking? What books am I reading? What podcasts am I listening to? And then tax strategy. How much am I paying attention to taxes? And then putting deal flow together with those other pieces. But when most people think passive income, the first thing they do is like, let's go get deals. Without the education, without the taxes, without the connections, you're never going to be as good of a passive investor as if you have those 3 things.
I've seen tax, you talk about third best tax advantages, like third best ROI. I've seen really smart investors in the mastermind kind of grow in that area. And that's a question that gets asked when deals are presented. A lot more gets asked about tax advantages, and requests for specific types of tax advantaged deals are coming up way more than they were, early on in our masterminds. So that's 100% correct. We don't even have time to get into the franchise that you're part of now and how you are doing it like very, very passive. we need to get you on. We'll do another session on that because I think people find that fascinating. Maybe we'll do it with your business partner as well. I'll let you be the choice, make the choice on that. Why don't you give just a quick, like 30 to 60 second, like how are you looking at your franchise investment as a passive deal? How are you doing that? How are you viewing that?
Got it. Wanted to find a franchise with enough meat on the bone to hire an operator who could do the majority of the work, right? Wanted to partner with people who are going to oversee that partner. So right now I have a franchise where the operator does the majority of the work, but I oversee it. I want to have a partner who oversees that. And then I wanted to partner with people who are fun, who shared the same values as I did. And anything that I did for the work of this new franchise deal, I wanted it to be in my skill set with things that I actually enjoy. So with my 3 partners, I work on things that I really like, the processes and systems. And it's also to the point where I don't actually have to execute most of it. I can just come up with it and say, here's what I want to have. And I can delegate it to another person on my team where she can actually, pull the switches and do all the things that need to get done for that. And I'm mainly working on strategy for something I really enjoy. And so we're early phases, but I think it'll be really exciting.
We'll kind of break that down. And I think you and I both kind of gone on this journey where we only want to do things that are fun with people that we enjoy hanging out with. I just got back from Vegas and had a blast with my business partners there. And then some of my past business partners, when we were there, we weren't there together, but they were in the same conference that I was at. And I said, guys, we should do something fun together. And like a fishing trip to Alaska or going to some other country, just doing something fun. And those are the types of people that you, me and Justin and Dane and other people that we go to Austin. Before I get sick, I had to leave early, but it was work combined with a lot of fun because we all like to have fun. We really enjoy each other's company. And that is probably one of the bigger lessons that I've learned in the past couple of years is partner with people that it just is effortless to be around them and you just enjoy their company. If there's no business or money to be made, you would choose to hang out with them because you have so much fun. That's the type of, those are the types of partners that I want moving forward and the types of partners that I have today.
Yeah, 100% agree.
All right, Mr. Ryan Casey, it's always good having you on. We'll have you. Oh, you're going to be a regular. You just don't know it yet, but you are now a regular on the pod. So thanks again.
All right. No, my pleasure. Always fun chatting.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Franchise Secrets Podcast. Whether you're watching or listening, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and to whatever channel you're listening on. If you want my help with anything from buying a franchise to franchising your business, please visit franchisesecrets.com.